This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and here's an exciting little pocket camera now in the 4th generation. This is the Sony RX100 Mark IV. Again, the 4th generation model has a new stacked sensor. Well, that sounds like could be suggestive, doesn't it? In this case, it's not. That's actually the kind of sensor that Sony's been using for smartphone cameras, and they're making the lion's share of smartphone camera sensors right now, at least at the higher end, and that allows for, well, quicker response times, some new features like not just 4K video recording, which is pretty cool in itself, but a lot of seriously slow motion or high frame rate videography rather. Photography, good as ever, amazing actually for a pocket camera, something this size. Is it cheap? No, these never are. That's the catch right there. This guy sells for around $950. We're gonna look at it now. So here it is, crazy small as ever, like 4 inches by 2 3/4 inches or so by 1 5/8 inches, 10.5 ounces with an SD card inside. That is the Sony RX100 Mark IV. Now, looking at it, other than the fact that it happens to say Mark IV on it, you would think this was the Mark III. Really, the body has not changed so much over time, and the lens has been the same for a couple of generations too. This is a 2.9x, or close enough to call it 3x, 24 to 70 millimeter equivalent lens, and it's f1.8 to 2.8 at the fast end, and it stops down to f11. Why doesn't it go to f16 like most lenses, or even f22? Probably because of the tiny sensor. The light diffraction would become an issue with the aperture being really too small. Not a big deal there. Anyway, Zeiss branding for the Zeiss lens on there, the Sony Mark. You can see we have a Verrier Sonar T-Star lens there up top. And that's the pop-up for the viewfinder. We'll get into that. That has not changed from the last generation. The pop-up flash right there, your on-off button, your little zoomy lever. I'm not a big fan of little zoomy levers. You can also set this to direct manual focus, and then it will use the one movable ring on the lens for that. Now, the context for this actually changes. For example, if you put an aperture priority, it will be controlling your aperture. If you put in shutter priority mode using the control wheel up here, standard PASM modes, it'll control your shutter speed. You get the idea. But I do think that it is better than zooming with the little lever. That's me. Notice on the wheel over here, those of you who are familiar with the RX100 series, we have a new item, HFR, high frame rate mode, because the new sensor allows us some new tricks. And probably if you're going to upgrade from an RX100 Mark III, it's because you're interested in those new tricks. Not just 4K video recording here at higher quality bit rates, but we also have slow motion up to 40x slower than normal. And that's if you're at 24p for your base mode. If you're at 60p, then it's going to be 16x. And we already have a video up on YouTube where you can see the 3 modes: 240p, 480, and 960 for your frame rates there. And each one is in progressively worse quality. That's because the camera, it outputs a 1920 by 1080 file, but it's really upsampling to do that. So the slower the video, the smaller the resolution of the original video, something like around 360p for the 960x slower. For example, 480 is about like HD, not full HD, so that's around, in the case of this camera, 480, 500p. And the 240 would be the best quality there. It's almost full HD, but really it doesn't look as good as just recording full HD with this. Also, interestingly, on the menus, and we'll show you all the options there is a 120 frame per second recording option that you have, not using the HFR, high frame mode here, and that's the highest quality, and it's still a pretty pleasing slow motion effect, and we'll splice in a sample of that so you can see it right now. And then after that, like I said, go look at our other video that shows you the 3 HFR modes to get an idea of what they look like. They really slow things down remarkably at the cost of some quality. They do not record audio. If you're recording with 120p in this, it will. Of course, things are going to sound pretty funny. It's like, oh, you know, that sort of thing. Which tells you why 960 frames per second is not recording any audio, because it would sound simply bizarre. Looking at the back, nothing really has changed. Again, we have the usual control wheel here. These controls, of course, are absolutely tiny. It's a tiny camera. There's really not much one can do about that. You got some programmable buttons. You got your C button here. You got your FM button for quick settings, the playback control. Our wheel does a variety of other things. Still not a touchscreen. Oh man, come on, Sony, get with the program. Your menu button's there, and here's the movie recording button, recessed so you don't accidentally hit it. Even if you're holding it by the little thumb rest right here, the rubbery thing, I have never once accidentally triggered movie recording. You have to really work at it. On the bottom right here is our tripod mount. Notice it's so close to the battery door that you really won't be opening the battery door, accessing the SD card while you have it on a tripod. We really can't complain so much about the design there, because what's Sony going to do? Look how tiny this thing is, right? There's just not so much room, and they have a circuit board under here. The panel, rear panel, comes out like so. It does not go side to side. It just does that. It does that. So you can hold it over your head. Say you're at a concert and you want to shoot. If you don't want to bend down, you can do that, and it's pretty darn handy. It's like a rangefinder kind of position. Or you can flip it facing yourself for glorious selfie mode. Before we move on to the rest of the controls, I just want to note also with the high frame rate video, it records for 2 seconds, and you can set it to either be an end trigger or beginning trigger when you press the movie button on this. So that means you've just seen the cool thing, then you hit the button real quick, because it's really watching and buffering the whole time. Or you know the really cool thing is about to begin, and then you hit it. It's 2 seconds becomes about 80 seconds worth of footage, so almost, a minute and a half or so. It's really pretty amazing. That means once you hit the button, you can pretty much do anything you want with the camera. It's just going to say processing for quite some time, and you can dance the Macarena if you want. Move it around. It doesn't matter anymore. It's already seen what it needs to see to process that video. On the side, again, not changed. We have our micro HDMI out port and what they call multi-port. It's really the USB port. This charges via USB. Battery life as ever is not so great. I mean, there's a small battery in here, and Sony says it's good for about 280 photos or so. So I suggest getting an external charger and a spare battery for this, unless you just don't tend to shoot a whole lot of photos at once. Video, particularly the high frame rate video, will really eat the battery quicker. You got the usual wrist strap mount right over here, and to turn it on is to see how big the lens actually gets, and kind of maybe the opposite of what you would expect. At wide mode, it's most extended. When we do telephoto, it actually retracts a little bit shorter. It's pretty quick to focus. Sony said they made autofocus improvements on this, improved contrast detection. This is still contrast detection only. There is no phase detection autofocus on this. They have added eye detection autofocus, which is a pretty darn cool feature and something you see in mirrorless cameras. And even though this is not interchangeable lens camera, this is a fixed lens, it's still a mirrorless camera. And voila, there is a pop-up OLED viewfinder over here. You slide the switch, it pops up. It's got a little T-star of its very own right there, because it has a T-star coating on the back element over here, supposedly reduced glare, and you have to pull it out yourself too. If you don't, you're just going to see blurry village, so you do want to pull it out. And there's a teeny little diopter adjustment right on the top there. Works just fine. This is 0.39 inches. It's tiny. For me, it is just too small. I know some of you love it and you get along with it. I just never have. I feel like my eyeball's going to pop out of my head. The resolution, however, is quite good. 2.36 million dot resolution. So you got XGA there, which is a step up from the Mark III, which was 1.44 million dots. So even sharper. Again, try it out for yourself, see if you can get along with it. I love EVFs, which is an electronic viewfinder. That means you're not looking through a piece of glass. You're actually seeing what the sensor sees, which is another great mirrorless feature. So you're seeing the proper exposure and all that sort of thing, just like you do on the back LCD of the camera, but it's darn small. And the back LCD, 3 inches there, gives you all sorts of shooting information. Also, it's what you see is what you get, 100% coverage experience there, over 1 million dots, so good enough resolution. And bright enough to see outdoors. There is no auto brightness adjustment on these, so you'll manually choose your brightness. Some of the quirks we know and, well, I'll just say live with the Sony RX100 series continue on here. The overly sensitive, see that? How sensitive that is? It thinks there's an eyeball there at the EVF when there isn't. I'm not exaggerating when I say that sometimes walking down the street on a sunny day, if you pass under a cloud, it actually will blank it out for a minute. That hasn't changed from the RX100 Mark III. Also, if you close this little guy and you push it down, it still turns the camera off, which I think is something that a lot of us actually wish didn't happen. Sometimes you just pop up the viewfinder to get a better view. Maybe it's a sunny day, you can't see the LCD. You put it back down and then boom, your camera's turned off. Brilliant. Brilliant. Not so much. Flash, still here. And it's a little slider guy, and it's a teeniest little flash, but it actually does a pretty good job, particularly as a bounce and fill flash at close range, obviously. I mean, look, that's small, right? It's not going to illuminate an entire room at a conference or something like that, but for fill flash, for close things, close portrait even, it works, and you can even manually bounce it like that, so that's pretty darn awesome. And this might look like a delicate thing, but I've never had a problem with it breaking, and to put it away, you just actually shove it back in there, which again, you get used to doing. It seems like a little scary at first, but it works just fine. So the sensor, it's still 20.1 megapixels. The resolution is not changing. However, it's an excellent sensor. Again, it's a stacked sensor, which sounds kind of weird. What does that mean? That means that the electronics can be stacked directly on the sensor. Potentially that could improve image quality, less signal loss, for example. What it also means is they can put the memory right on the sensor, which allows some of the things like the high frame rate capture that's happening here, and the higher quality video recording. By the way, if you're recording 4K video, then you need to have a SDXC Class 10 UHS-1 card. If you want to do 120 frames per second at the 100 megabit per second bit rate, you have to have a UHS-3 card. Those are a little bit hard to find. You're going to have to hunt a bit for those, and they're a bit more expensive. And if you're recording in 4K or if you're recording in the high frame rate mode, Sony wants that to be a 64 gig card, by the way. That's a Sony thing. They like to do that. They did that with the Sony a6000 when it got its video upgrade to higher quality too. That's just what they do. It can shoot XAVC-S for video recording, which is pretty nice. That's higher bitrate, higher quality. And of course, if you want, there's still AVC HD and just regular old MP4. Interestingly, and this is the odd thing about Sony, okay, this can do S-Log 2, which is pretty advanced, and probably half of you watching this don't even know what that means. So that's for professional video recording where it looks, the footage, if you look at it, looks very undersaturated. It gives you latitude to do color enhancement and balance and all that sort of thing. It's an advanced feature. So we have advanced features like that. We have the very high quality codec on here, but we don't have anywhere on here a hot shoe for accessory audio input, nor do we have a microphone jack, which would be must. If you're doing professional quality video, you need high quality audio to go along with it, unless Sony thinks you're just going to dub everything afterwards. So if you're making your own movie and you've got actors, well, that's not going to work. But if you're doing a product video like this, obviously, in theory, we could dub it afterwards. I prefer to do it actually in real time while handling and talking about the product. That's Sony. They're just kind of weird that way. Maybe they don't want to step on the toes of the Sony a7 and the a7R Mark II and all those higher end cameras. I don't know. And for your visual pleasure, here are those video recording options that are available. And for even more settings, you can see we were doing that most recently. You can go up to 120p, which is a slow motion but high quality. Like I said, you've got 24p, 54 meg, 60p, and 50, which is I think what most people are going to use right there. And those are your options if you're using the higher quality codec with it. And for HFR settings, your high frame rate, you can set the base recording rate. So if you go to 30, you can theoretically slow things down even more and then choose your frame rate that you want. And end trigger or beginning trigger. And going for quality, we are there. And it has a little explanation. It says if you're choosing 240, you've got 8x slow motion going at 30p. So it gives you a little help there in figuring those things out. In terms of the rest of the menus, they're pretty much all the standard Sony stuff. If you've used any recent Sony camera, whether it be a a6000, an a7, any of those, or even the RX100 Mark III, this will all look pretty familiar to you. Nothing has changed, and you use the little wheel to get around. We got our zebras, we got manual focus assist on here. I do like the direct manual focus option on this, I'll say it again. We have focus peaking as well. Now this camera focuses very well. I have not really often found a need for focus peaking when I'm trying to do a pseudo macro, because this doesn't really get very close for focusing, about a foot away when you're at the telephoto end. Still, it's nice to make sure what's in focus, and that can help you with that. And then we've got Wi-Fi NFC here, NFC to aid in Wi-Fi connecting, so you can use your smartphone as a remote, transfer pictures. All the things you would expect are there. Customizable buttons. We have FN here that gives you quick access to your white balance, focus area, whether you want continuous, single, autofocus, ISO, all the basics there, and you can change that to your heart's content. And this will change depending on context. We're in P mode right now, so that's what you're going to see. If you go to auto mode, there's less stuff that you can change. Other fairly sophisticated features we have auto ISO that goes from 125 to 12,800, and you can set upper and lower limits, which is nice. Of course, there's extended ISO if you want to go even higher, but your pictures will get, noisier and noisier. Anything up to 6400 is fairly usable with this, and that was the power out timer, so it shuts itself off. It has one of those too, and that is adjustable. 16.7 frames per second burst shooting, Sony claims, and it is pretty fast. I mean, I'm using a fast card in this also, which helps, so I can use all the nifty video recording modes on this. As a built-in neutral density filter, what does that mean? It means the scene is too bright, and this is particularly useful for video. It just basically gives the camera a little set of internal sunglasses, so you don't have to worry about your shutter speed and stuff like that. It does have a max electronic shutter speed of 1/32,000th, which is insanely high. It's immeasurably, you can't see that with your eyes, kind of high, and that's one of the benefits, again, of the new stacked sensor electronics that are inside. The max mechanical shutter speed is your more average and normal 1/2000th. Now, electronic shutter can work just fine. It can be a little weird under fluorescent lights because sometimes you just start to see the lights pulsing and stuff, so do test that out. This does not throw away half of the pixels when it's recording video. It's supposed to do full scanning, and that means reduced jello effect. Jello effect is when you're recording a video and you're panning and you see the buildings going woo, woo, woo. They seem to be following the motion a little bit. We'll splice in a shot that I took going quickly, panning at 1080p, and you'll see that there really isn't any problematic jello effect there, and I was panning back and forth already, I think, too fast. I mean, you don't want to make people have a seizure or go dizzy, do you, either? It's pretty darn good. Moiré effect is also well controlled with this. Now, the sensor on this is super, really very, very good. 20 megapixels, and megapixels aren't everything, but the quality is really good. Given the short zoom range on this, relatively speaking, it's the same as a kit lens on a digital SLR or your mirrorless camera, the first one that you get. You're going to have to do some cropping probably. You can't always get close enough, and the sensor is so good, and we're going to splice in a picture of a green lizard that is exquisitely sharp, and then we'll show you the full picture it was taken from, how much you can actually crop and keep this sharp. It's very impressive. What are the drawbacks with the 1-inch sensor and a little camera like this? I know some people are going to buy this just because they want the highest quality thing they can fit in their pocket, and everybody says this is it, and it is very good. Others of you are more serious about your photography, and you are used to having certain creature comforts with your larger sensor camera. This is a 1-inch sensor. There is pretty much always going to be wide depth of field. If you want shallow depth of field or bokeh, this is not your camera. I do actually a lot of portrait-style photos, even of objects, but they're really more in the portrait genre. And then the zoom lens stopping at equivalent of 70 millimeter and the 1-inch sensor mean that there's just about no background blur. And I'm going to splice in a photo right now. You can see a woman and a child, and it's a really neat shot, but the background is pretty darn distracting because even though it wasn't really close to them, it's still not blurred very much. And that's just the nature of the beast here. This is a fine camera for landscape photography, especially given the sharp sensor and the detail. And even the JPEGs out of this are pretty good. Sometimes people pick on Sony for their JPEGs. They're good. You also have RAW. Comes with Capture One Express for Sony. And Lightroom and Photoshop should soon be able to read the RAW files from this. But in the meanwhile, Capture One does the job pretty well. Anyway, fine for landscapes. It's great for street photography as long as you really don't want to get any background blur effect going on. It's not bad for sports. The autofocus speed is pretty good on this. I mean, the length of the zoom is too short. This 70 millimeter is not going to be good for football, soccer, and all that sort of thing because you just can't get that close. But with that said, just keep that in mind. If you're used to doing artsy shots with lots of control of your depth of field, you will have just about none here. And we'll throw in a few in our gallery of flowers and things like that, so you can see the extent of background blur that's possible in our gallery section. Testing for jello effect, rolling shutter, any distortion. I think it's about as fast a pan as anybody would do. I mean, you don't want to make people sick when they're watching your movie, right? Shutter speed is not too loud, and yes, it's a little bit slow. That's because there's actually nothing over there for it to focus on, so let's give it something to focus on and be a little bit fairer with it. Now, sometimes there is a little bit of lens shadowing here. This does not pop up quite high enough. It really is better if you do something like bounce it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here on the viewfinder. There's the picture where I bounced it. That looks fine. Here's see the lens is creating a shadow over here. So when you're at telephoto and this does not quite have enough rise, you're going to have to help it out. So who's this camera for? Like I said, it's for those of you who want the best possible quality pocket camera, high resolution, really sharp pictures, but you don't need a long zoom. Now there are quite a few point and shoots with very long zooms. Sony makes, in fact, some of the nicest ones. You won't get quite the image quality, but sometimes the zoom is going to be, range is going to be more important, especially if you're shooting your kids on the soccer field kind of far away there, or you're going to the zoo, and obviously you're not going to get real up close and personal with that tiger, right? Probably not. It's also for those of you who are photo buffs and you're just used to having really good image quality. If you can live with the 1-inch sensor size and the lack of bokeh or narrow depth of field that you get with this, and being limited to the 24 by 70 zoom, you can't swap in another lens. And stupendous pictures, really sharp, fantastic vacation camera, that sort of thing. If you have a Sony RX100 Mark III, unless you're really enamored with that 4K video, which is again limited to 5 minutes at a shot because it's going to overheat otherwise. If I had the RX100 Mark III, I probably wouldn't get this. Yes, you get a little sharper EVF, but other than that, nah. The RX100 too is still an interesting camera because, well, it has actually a hot shoe, so you could use an accessory like a microphone potentially there. And I like the longer zoom. The RX100 one, that 3.6 X zoom was pretty darn nice, but it didn't have the backside illuminated sensor that the Mark II, 3, and 4 have. So my personal favorite is still the Mark II, but that's for you to decide for yourself now that you've seen our video. So that's the Sony RX100 Mark IV, available just now here in July of 2015, and arguably, yes, it is the best pocket camera, at least among the super small ones. You're not going to find one this quality any smaller than this. Of course, that comes at a price. Like I said, it's expensive at $950 or so, and you lose some of the creature comforts that you get with cheaper point and shoots, like really long zoom range, for example, but in return you get super duper image quality, and it'd be hard to tell some of these photos from an APS-C size sensor like a digital SLR size camera. So there's a lot going for it. You got the built-in flash with bounceable zoom. You actually have an electronic viewfinder, which some of you probably can use a lot better than me. It's still too small for me. 3-inch LCD on the back, 4K video recording. You can live with that 5-minute limit. Probably most people can. Stupendous image quality. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Don't forget to visit mobiletechreview.com for our full written review and subscribe to our YouTube channel.